Have you ever looked at a photograph from a happy occasion and wondered what secrets were hiding just outside the frame? What unspoken truths were simmering just beneath the smiling faces? This is a story about one of those moments. A moment at a wedding, a place of supposed joy and union, where a family's carefully constructed fantasy shattered in a single, echoing sound. It began with a toast. The reception hall was a fairy tale of white roses and shimmering crystal, packed with 300 guests whose laughter and chatter filled the air like music. At the head table sat Chloe, the bride, a vision in lace and silk, her smile as bright as the diamond on her finger. Beside her, her new husband, Mark, watched her with an expression of pure adoration. And then, her older brother, Liam, was asked to give his speech. He rose slowly, a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding him. His suit was a size too big, the fabric thin and worn. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed with a weariness that went deeper than a single late night. He clutched a small, crumpled piece of paper in his hand, his knuckles white. He cleared his throat, the sound raw in the microphone. "Chloe," he began, his voice unsteady but sincere. "My little sister. I remember when you were born. I was 5, and I was so sure you were a present just for me." A few guests chuckled softly. "Watching you grow up, it's been the honor of my life. You were always the bright one, the star. You dreamed so big. And look at you now." He looked from Chloe to Mark. "Mark, you're a lucky man. You found the best person I know. All I've ever wanted was for her to be happy, to have everything she ever dreamed of." His eyes started to glisten. I wish Dad could be here to see this. He would be so proud of the woman you've become." He raised his glass. "To Chloe and Mark. May your life together be." But he never finished the sentence. "How dare you?" a voice cut through the room, sharp and cold. It was Chloe. She was on her feet, her beautiful face twisted into a mask of fury. "How dare you stand up there and pretend to care?" The room fell silent. The music faded. Every eye was on the head table. Mark looked utterly bewildered, reaching for his wife's hand, but she snatched it away. "Pretend," Liam whispered into the microphone, his face pale with confusion. "Chloe, what are you talking about?" She started walking towards him, her movement stiff with rage. "You talk about Dad? You talk about my dreams? You have done nothing but disappoint this family since the day he died. You dropped out of school, you work some pathetic job, you reek of failure, and you bring that stench to my wedding." The guests gasped, murmuring amongst themselves. Liam just stood there, speechless, his hand with the crumpled speech falling to his side. Their mother, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair and a string of pearls, was now on her feet too, her expression hard as stone. She didn't move to stop her daughter. She watched, her arms crossed, as if she were a spectator at a long overdue execution. Chloe reached the small stage where Liam stood. "You couldn't even be bothered to buy a decent suit. You couldn't even give us a proper gift. All you do is take. You are a constant embarrassment. You ruined my wedding photos by just being in them, and now you ruin my reception with your pathetic, self-pitying speech." She was close now, her voice a venomous hiss. "You don't get to talk about my happiness. You've never contributed anything to it." And then, with all the force she could muster, she swung her hand and slapped him hard across the face. The crack echoed through the silent hall, a sound so violent it seemed to suck the air out of the room. A bright red handprint instantly bloomed on Liam's cheek. He staggered back a step, his eyes wide with shock and a pain that was far deeper than the physical sting. Before anyone could react, their mother stepped forward, placing a firm, protective hand on Chloe's shoulder. She looked not at her son, but at her daughter. Then she turned her icy gaze to Liam, who was still cradling his cheek, his world tilting on its axis. "That," his mother said, her voice clear and cutting for everyone to hear, "is exactly what you deserve." Liam didn't say a word. He didn't defend himself. He didn't cry out. It was as if the slap and his mother's words had turned him to stone. The vibrant, joyful room had become a courtroom, and he had just been sentenced without a trial. The faces of the 300 guests swam before him, a blur of shock, pity, and morbid curiosity. He could feel their stares like physical blows. He looked at his sister, whose chest was heaving with righteous anger, tears of fury now streaming down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. He looked at his mother, whose face was a granite mask of approval, her arm wrapped tightly around Chloe, shielding her as if she were the victim. Finally, his eyes landed on Mark, the groom. Mark, who was still frozen in his seat at the head table, his expression a chaotic mix of horror, disbelief, and a dawning, terrible confusion. He looked like a man who had just discovered the beautiful painting he'd bought was a forgery. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between the two men, a question in Mark's eyes, and a profound, bottomless resignation in Liam's. With a quiet dignity that was heartbreaking to witness, Liam lowered his hand from his cheek. He carefully placed the crumpled speech on the lectern, smoothed it out once, and then turned. He walked down the small steps, his footsteps unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. He didn't look at anyone as he walked the long aisle back through the sea of guests, a lone, rejected figure retreating from the fairy tale he was never truly a part of. The heavy oak doors of the reception hall swung shut behind him, leaving a void that no amount of music or champagne could ever fill. The spell was broken. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, Chloe let out a theatrical sob, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. "He ruined it," she cried. "He ruined my perfect day." Her mother hugged her tightly, stroking her hair and murmuring comforting words, casting accusatory glances around the room, daring anyone to challenge them. The perfect wedding had been irrevocably stained, and in their minds, there was only one person to blame. Mark finally broke from his paralysis. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor, and went to his wife. "Chloe, what was that?" he demanded, his voice low but tense. "What in God's name was that?" He tried to pull her away from her mother, to look her in the eye, but she resisted. "You saw what he did, Mark," she sobbed, her voice muffled by her mother's dress. "He was trying to make it all about him. His sadness, his failures. On my wedding day." The mother looked at Mark, her eyes narrowed. "Mark, you don't understand. Liam has been a burden on this family for years. He's lazy, unmotivated. He threw away every opportunity we gave him after his father passed. He broke my heart. He broke Chloe's heart. He resents her success, her happiness with you. We've tried to be patient, but this was the last straw." Mark listened, but the words felt hollow, like lines from a well-rehearsed play. He was a logical man, a partner at a law firm. He analyzed people for a living, and the story his new wife and mother-in-law were spinning didn't add up. It was too simple, too one-sided. Resentment didn't explain the profound, bone-deep sadness he'd seen in Liam's eyes. It didn't explain the lack of any defense, the quiet acceptance of such a brutal public humiliation. "A burden?" Mark repeated, his mind racing. "What do you mean, a burden?" Chloe finally pulled back, her face blotchy. "He dropped out of a top-tier university, Mark. Dad had saved for years for that. Liam just threw it away. He's been working as a mechanic ever since. He lives in some tiny, awful apartment across town. He never helps out, never contributes. We had to handle everything after Dad, everything." She gestured around the opulent hall. "Do you know how hard we had to work for all of this? And he shows up in that cheap suit, with some sob story, trying to get pity." Mark looked from Chloe's designer dress to her mother's expensive jewelry, to the 300 guests sipping champagne. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with the picture they were painting. He was starting to feel a cold dread creep into his heart, a fear that the family he had just married into was built on a foundation of lies he was only now beginning to see. An image flashed in Mark's mind, something he'd barely registered earlier in the day. When he'd shaken Liam's hand before the ceremony, he'd noticed them. Liam's hands. They weren't the hands of a lazy person. They were the hands of a man who worked, and worked hard. They were rough and calloused, the knuckles scarred. There were faint, dark lines of grease etched into the skin, so deep that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove them. He'd tried, Mark realized. He'd tried to clean them up for the wedding, but the evidence of his labor was embedded in his very skin. It was a stark contrast to the story of a lazy and unmotivated man. The ill-fitting suit suddenly seemed different, not a sign of disrespect, but perhaps a symbol of necessity. Mark thought back to the brief conversation they'd had. Liam had seemed genuinely overjoyed for them, but also completely exhausted, as if he were running on fumes. He'd said, "Just seeing her this happy makes it all worth it." Worth what? Mark had thought it was just a sweet sentiment. Now, the words carried a different, heavier weight. He needed to know the truth. Not their version of it. The real one. "I need some air," he said abruptly, turning away from Chloe and her mother before they could protest. He walked briskly out of the hall, ignoring the whispers that followed him. The garden air was cool and crisp against his face. He scanned the manicured lawns and stone benches, half expecting Liam to be gone. But then he saw him. He was sitting on a secluded bench tucked away behind a large fountain, its gentle splashing the only sound. He wasn't crying. He was just sitting there, his shoulders slumped, staring into the darkness. He looked smaller than he had on the stage, stripped of all pretense, a man utterly and completely defeated. Mark felt a surge of something, not pity, but a fierce, desperate need for understanding. He walked over and sat down beside him, leaving a respectful distance. The silence stretched between them, thick with everything that had just happened. Liam didn't look up. He seemed to shrink further into himself, as if bracing for another blow, another accusation. Mark took a deep breath. He had to tread carefully. "Liam," he began, his voice quiet. "I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to take sides. I just want to understand." Liam gave a short, bitter laugh, the sound devoid of any humor. "Understand what?" "They told you everything you need to know. I'm the family disappointment. The screw-up. The resentful older brother. It's the role I was given." His voice was flat, empty. "I don't believe them," Mark said simply. The words hung in the air. Liam finally turned his head, looking at Mark for the first time. There was a flicker of surprise in his exhausted eyes. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Because I saw your hands," Mark said. "And I heard your toast. What I saw and what I heard doesn't match the man they described." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze earnest. "They said you dropped out of school. That you threw it all away. Why, Liam? Why would you do that?" Liam looked away, his jaw tight. "It doesn't matter anymore, it matters to me," Mark insisted, his voice gaining an edge of urgency. "I just married your sister. I'm part of this family now. And I will not stand by and watch a good man be torn down for reasons I don't understand. Please, tell me your version of the story." The plea was genuine. For the first time in a long time, someone was asking for his truth, not for his apology. A dam inside Liam, one he had built and fortified for 10 long years, began to crack. A single tear traced a path through the red mark on his cheek. He wiped it away angrily, but another followed. The story he had carried alone for so long was finally clawing its way to the surface, demanding to be heard. "When my father died," Liam began, his voice thick with unshed tears, "he didn't just leave us with grief. He left us with debt. A mountain of it. He'd made some bad investments, taken out secret loans to keep his business afloat. My mother, she fell apart. All she knew was that the bank was going to take the house, that Chloe would have to leave her private high school. Everything was about to collapse." He took a shaky breath, the memory still raw. "I was 19. I was in my first year at the university Dad had been so proud of. I was studying architecture. But I looked at my mom, so lost, and I looked at Chloe, she was only 15. Her whole world was her friends, her art classes, her dreams of going to a design college. How could I let that be taken from her? How could I watch her future crumble because of mistakes that weren't her fault?" He looked at his own hands, turning them over as if they belonged to someone else. So, I made a choice. I didn't tell them the full extent of the debt. I didn't want to scare them more than they already were. I just told them I'd handle it. I dropped out of university. I told them I wasn't cut out for it, that I was failing. It was easier for them to be disappointed in me than to be terrified with me. He looked up at Mark, his eyes burning with a decade of swallowed pain. I got a job at a garage. Then I got a second job, cleaning office buildings at night. For 10 years, Mark. For 10 years, almost every dollar I've ever made has gone to paying off that debt, to paying the mortgage, to keeping the lights on. It went to Chloe's school fees, her art supplies, her university tuition. I let them think I was a failure so she could have a chance to succeed. The fountain splashed nearby, a gentle counterpoint to the devastating weight of his confession. The whole fairy tale of the wedding, the beautiful dress, the adoring family, it was all a lie, built on the back of this man's silent, crushing sacrifice. The suit, Mark said, the realization dawning on him. It's the best you could afford. Liam nodded, a wry, heartbreaking smile touching his lips. Yeah. It was either a new suit or something else. He hesitated, then seemed to decide that the whole truth might as well come out. Last week, I overheard my mother on the phone. She was crying. The final payment for the caterer was due, and she was short. Thousands of dollars short. She was terrified of telling Chloe, terrified of ruining her perfect day, so he trailed off, the implication clear. So you paid it, Mark finished for him, his voice barely audible. You were late to the rehearsal dinner because you had to pick up an extra night shift to cover it, weren't you? Liam's silence was his confirmation. He reached into the inside pocket of his worn jacket and pulled out his phone. His fingers, calloused and stained, fumbled with the screen for a moment before he held it out to Mark. On the screen was a text message conversation. One was from his boss at the cleaning company, confirming his extra shift. The other was a payment confirmation receipt from the wedding caterer, dated 2 days ago, for $4,500. The final puzzle piece clicked into place. The disappointing gift. His gift wasn't a small envelope with a paltry check inside. His gift was the meal everyone was eating. His gift was the servers who were pouring the wine. His gift was the very foundation of the celebration. He had given his sister her perfect day, and in return, she had given him public humiliation and a slap across the face, while their mother, the direct beneficiary of his latest sacrifice, had looked on and approved. A cold, quiet fury began to build in Mark's chest. It was a lawyer's fury, precise, focused, and absolute. He had been presented with the evidence. He now saw the entire case, the years of injustice, the gross miscarriage of familial love. The victim wasn't the crying bride inside, it was the broken man sitting next to him in the dark. Mark stood up. He felt a clarity he hadn't felt all day. He knew exactly what he had to do. He handed the phone back to Liam. "Stay here," he said, his voice calm but steely. He turned and walked back towards the reception hall, his stride purposeful. He didn't just push the doors open, he strode through them. The mood inside was still somber, the guests speaking in hushed tones. Chloe and her mother were sitting back at the head table, attempting to regain some semblance of normalcy, trying to coax the band to start playing again. Mark walked past them without a glance and went directly to the lectern, picking up the microphone. A feedback squeal cut through the murmurs, and all eyes snapped to him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice amplified, clear, and utterly commanding. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Chloe looked up, a mixture of relief and annoyance on her face. She probably thought he was about to smooth things over, to apologize for her brother's behavior and get the party back on track. Her mother looked on expectantly. They had no idea what was coming. A few minutes ago, Mark began, his eyes locking onto Chloe and her mother, pinning them in place. "We all witnessed an act of cruelty. We were told it was justified. We were told that Liam was a failure, a burden, a source of disappointment who deserved to be shamed." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I have just learned the truth. And you all deserve to hear it, too." He saw a flicker of panic in the mother's eyes. Chloe just looked confused. We were told Liam dropped out of university because he was lazy, Mark continued, his voice rising with controlled power. The truth is, he dropped out to take on 2 full-time jobs. He did it to pay off the secret, crushing debt his father left behind. He worked day and night so his mother wouldn't lose her home, and so his sister, he stared directly at Chloe now, could stay in her private school and go to her dream college. For 10 years, the man you called a failure has been the sole pillar holding this family up. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Chloe's face went white. Her mother looked like she'd been physically struck. We were told he was a constant embarrassment, that he never contributes. Mark's voice was relentless, a surgeon's scalpel cutting away the lies. The truth is, nearly every penny he has earned for a decade has gone into this family. The clothes on your back, the education you're so proud of, Chloe. It was all bought and paid for by the sweat of the brother you just shamed. He held up his own phone now, having had Liam forward him the message. And this wedding? This perfect day? We were told he couldn't even afford a proper gift. The truth is, Liam's gift was paying the final $4,500 catering bill that your mother couldn't afford. He worked an extra night shift cleaning floors just 2 days ago to make sure you all had a meal to eat tonight. He projected the image of the receipt for everyone to see. The silence in the room was now absolute, heavier and more profound than before. It was the silence of judgment. The guests were no longer looking at Chloe and her mother with pity, but with a dawning, shared horror and contempt. Chloe's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The beautiful, confident bride had crumbled, replaced by a girl staring at the wreckage of a truth she had refused to see. Her mother simply stared at the floor, her face ashen, the pearls around her neck suddenly looking like a choker. Mark lowered the microphone. He walked down from the stage and approached the head table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He leaned down, his voice just for Chloe, but in the dead silence, everyone heard it. The man you slapped, he said, his voice laced with ice and sorrow, is the only reason you are standing here in this dress, in this hall. He built your happiness on the foundation of his own broken dreams. He then looked at the mother. And you let him without another word. He turned his back on them. He walked the long aisle, just as Liam had done, but he wasn't retreating. He was advancing toward something real. He pushed open the doors and found Liam still on the bench. He walked over and simply put a hand on his brother-in-law's shoulder. "Let's get out of here," he said. Liam looked up, and for the first time that night, a genuine, relieved light entered his eyes. He stood up, and together, the 2 men walked away into the night, leaving the hollow, tainted party and the wreckage of a family's lies behind them. The greatest sacrifices are often the ones no one ever sees. They are the silent choices made in the dark, the burdens carried with a smile, the dreams given up so that another's might flourish. We must be careful not to mistake quiet strength for weakness, or sacrifice for failure. True family isn't about keeping up appearances, it's about seeing the truth of what someone gives, even when they give it from the shadows. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that the most valuable gifts don't come wrapped in paper but in unseen acts of love. And take a moment to thank the quiet heroes in your own life. You may not even know all they've done for you,